People in her town often smiled when they heard she wanted to play piano on a big stage. Not a warm smile, not a proud one. It was the kind of smile people give when they think someone is dreaming too far. Music, to them, was something nice to listen to on the radio while cooking or driving. It was not something that could change a life. And it was definitely not something that could take a girl from a quiet place and put her in front of the best musicians in the world. She grew up in a small house where mornings were loud and evenings were long. There was always work to do and not much time to rest. Money was counted carefully. Nothing was wasted. Her first piano was not really a piano at all. It was an old keyboard with a few broken keys and a sound that sometimes cut off in the middle of a note. It sat near a window that did not close properly. In winter, cold air slipped in. In summer, dust did the same. She did not complain. She pressed the keys again and again, even when the sound was not perfect. She learned early that music was not about perfect tools. It was about feeling. When she played, the room felt different. The noise of the street faded. The worries of the day softened. Her hands were small at first, stretching to reach notes that felt too far apart. Sometimes her fingers hurt. Sometimes she cried quietly so no one would hear. People around her noticed her love for music, but they did not take it seriously. Some said it was a nice hobby. Others said she would grow out of it. A few laughed and said she should focus on something practical. No one meant to be cruel. They just did not believe that someone like her could reach that level. Big stages belonged to people with money, training, and connections. She had none of those. Still, she practiced every day. Early in the morning, before the house woke up, and late at night when everyone else slept. She watched free videos, copied sounds by ear, and replayed songs until her fingers moved without thinking. She imagined herself sitting in grand halls she had only seen on a screen. Rows of seats, bright lights, a real piano with deep, clear sound. These thoughts kept her going when doubt crept in. One afternoon, a notice appeared at a small music shop in the nearest city. It talked about a public masterclass and open performance. Anyone could apply. The most shocking part was the name attached to it. A world-known pianist would be there. Someone whose performances filled concert halls and whose recordings were studied by students everywhere. For her, this person felt unreal, like a figure from another world. She read the notice again and again. Her heart beat faster each time. Part of her felt excited. Another part felt foolish for even thinking about it. She imagined people laughing if she showed up. She imagined sitting at a real piano and freezing. That night she barely slept. The paper with the details stayed folded under her pillow. When she finally told people about it, the reaction was exactly what she feared. Some laughed softly. Some raised their eyebrows. A few joked that she would be lucky just to see the famous pianist from far away. One person said she must be brave to think she could impress someone like that. The word brave did not feel like praise. Felt like doubt dressed nicely. She nodded and smiled, acting like their words did not hurt. But inside they did. She questioned herself more than anyone else ever could. She knew she was not trained in the traditional way. She knew her technique was not perfect. But she also knew what music meant to her. It was the one place where she felt strong. In the days that followed, she practiced harder than ever. Not to prove others wrong, but to answer her own questions. Late nights turned into early mornings. Her fingers moved faster, smoother. She listened closely to every sound she made, adjusting small things others might never notice. When she closed her eyes, she could almost feel the weight of a real piano under her hands. The day she sent her application felt unreal. She expected nothing. When a response came saying she was allowed to attend and perform, she read it 3 times to be sure. Her hands shook. Excitement mixed with fear. There was no turning back now. Traveling to the city was another challenge. The buildings were taller than anything she had known. The streets were crowded. The music hall looked huge, with glass doors and polished floors. She stood outside for a moment, breathing slowly. People walked past her, confident and well-dressed, carrying instrument cases and sheet music. Inside, the hall buzzed with quiet energy. Voices echoed softly. Pianos were being tested. She found a seat and watched others warm up. Their playing sounded clean and powerful. Some had teachers beside them giving advice. She sat alone, hands folded, feeling smaller by the minute. The famous pianist had not arrived yet, but everyone talked about them. Whispers filled the air. Expectations hung heavy. She wondered what that person would think of her playing. Would they even listen? Or would they dismiss her after the first few notes? As her turn slowly approached, her heart raced. She thought about home, about the broken keyboard by the window, about every time someone smiled like it was a joke. She reminded herself why she was there. Not for fame, not for approval, but because music was her voice, and this was her chance to let it be heard. She stood up when her name was called. The stage felt far away, like a long walk into the unknown. Each step echoed in her ears. The piano waited under the lights, silent and heavy with promise. She sat down, placed her hands on the keys, and took a deep breath. Behind her, the door opened quietly. The famous pianist had arrived and taken a seat. She did not turn around. She did not look. She focused on the keys in front of her. For a moment, everything else disappeared. The doubt, the laughter, the fear. All that remained was the music waiting to begin. She sat still for a moment after placing her hands on the keys. The hall felt too quiet, like everyone was holding their breath at the same time. Her heart beat so loudly she was sure others could hear it. The piano in front of her was nothing like the keyboard at home. The keys were heavier, smoother, and perfectly spaced. Scared her, but it also felt right. Her fingers hovered in the air. For a second, doubt rushed in. A voice in her head repeated everything she had heard over the years. That she was not trained enough. That she did not belong here. That people were watching just to see her fail. She swallowed and took another breath, deeper this time. She pressed the first key. The sound filled the room in a way she was not ready for. It was rich and warm, like the piano itself was alive. The second note followed, then the third. Slowly, the shaking in her hands eased. Her body remembered what to do. This was the same music she had played 100 times before, even if the place was different. At first, the audience stayed distant. Some leaned back in their seats. A few whispered to each other. It was clear many of them expected nothing special. She felt it, but she did not look up. She focused on the keys, on the flow of the melody, on the small pauses between notes. As the music continued, something shifted inside her. The hall no longer felt so big. The people no longer felt so close. She imagined herself back in her room at home, sunlight touching the keys, the window slightly open. The music softened, then grew stronger. Her fingers moved with more confidence now, pressing deeper, allowing emotion to guide them. A small mistake came halfway through. One note landed wrong, sharp and unexpected. Her heart jumped. For a split second, panic threatened to take over. But she did not stop. She adjusted, blended it into the next phrase, and moved on. The mistake passed like a brief shadow. That moment changed everything. Instead of breaking her, it freed her. She realized she did not need to be perfect. She needed to be honest. She let go of the fear of judgment and leaned fully into the music. The melody began to breathe. Each note carried a piece of her story, her struggle, her quiet hope. People in the audience began to sit forward. Whispers faded. A few heads lifted. The sound coming from the piano was no longer background noise. It demanded attention. Some listeners closed their eyes without realizing it. The famous pianist, sitting a few rows back, looked up from the program. At first, the expression was neutral. Then it changed slightly. The head tilted. The eyes focused. This was not what was expected. There was something raw in the playing, something that could not be taught from books. She felt the shift even without looking. The air felt warmer, heavier, like the music had weight. Her hands moved faster now, then slowed, shaping the sound carefully. She played softer than before, drawing people in, forcing them to listen closely. Her mind drifted to the nights she practiced alone, to the cold mornings when her fingers felt stiff, to the laughter she pretended not to hear. All of it flowed into the music. It was no longer just a performance. It was a release. Another difficult passage approached, one she had struggled with many times. At home, the broken keyboard often failed her here. But this piano responded beautifully. The notes rang clear. Her fingers danced across the keys, steady and sure. A few audience members exchanged looks. This was no joke. This was no lucky attempt. The music carried intention, control, and deep feeling. Applause wanted to break out, but no one dared interrupt. The famous pianist leaned forward now, elbows resting on knees. There was no smile, no frown, just complete focus. Every note mattered. Every pause spoke. As the piece moved toward its final section, her breathing slowed. She felt calm in a way she never had before. The fear was gone. Only the music remained. She allowed the last notes to stretch, to linger in the air, refusing to rush them. The final chord echoed through the hall. Silence followed. For a long second, no one moved. The sound faded slowly, like a memory slipping away. Her hands rested on the keys. She did not look up. She waited. Then someone clapped. Another followed. Then many more. The applause grew, filling the space she had just filled with music. She stood up slowly, stunned. Her legs felt weak. She bowed once, unsure of what else to do. As she turned to leave the stage, her eyes finally met the gaze of the famous pianist. Their expression was no longer distant. It was thoughtful, impressed, and curious. She walked back to her seat, heart pounding again, but this time for a different reason. She did not know what would happen next. She did not know if this moment would change anything. But one thing was clear. No one was smiling like it was a joke anymore. She sat back in her seat while the applause slowly faded. Her ears rang, not from the sound, but from the moment itself. It felt unreal, like she had stepped out of her own life and into someone else's for a few minutes. People around her whispered, but their words blurred together. She kept her eyes down, hands resting on her knees, trying to steady her breathing. Inside her chest, emotions tangled together. Relief came first. She had finished. She had not frozen. She had not walked off the stage. Then came disbelief. She replayed the performance in her mind, searching for mistakes, expecting regret. But what she felt most was a strange calm, as if something heavy had finally been set down. The famous pianist stood up a short while later and walked toward the stage. The room grew quiet again. Everyone watched closely. This was the moment most people had been waiting for. The feedback, the judgment, the sharp words that often came with greatness. She stayed in her seat, telling herself not to expect anything. Praise or criticism, she would accept it. At least she had been heard. The pianist spoke slowly, choosing words with care. They talked about technique, about discipline, about the years it takes to master sound. Several performers were mentioned and given brief comments. Then the tone shifted. There was a pause. The pianist spoke about feeling something unexpected during a performance. About how music is not only about clean notes but about truth. About how some players carry a story in their hands. Eyes moved through the room, searching. Then the pianist looked directly at her. She felt her stomach drop. The words that followed were not loud, but they were clear. The pianist said her playing had feeling that could not be taught easily. That there was honesty in the way she touched the keys. That mistakes mattered less when the heart was fully present. A few people turned to look at her. She felt her face grow warm. Part of her wanted to disappear. Another part wanted to cry. The pianist did not exaggerate or flatter. The praise felt real, grounded, and careful. It made the moment heavier in the best way. When the pianist finished speaking, the room filled with applause again. Softer this time, but deeper. She sat frozen for a moment, then stood when others around her nudged gently. She nodded, unsure how to react. Her hands shook again, but now it was from emotion, not fear. After the session ended, people began to move around. Some gathered in small groups, talking excitedly. Others packed their bags quietly. She stayed seated, hoping to avoid attention. It did not work. A woman approached first, smiling warmly. She said the performance had moved her. A young student followed, asking how long she had been playing. Someone else mentioned they had not expected such depth. Each comment felt strange, like they were meant for someone else. She answered simply, politely, still unsure of her place in all this. She did not brag. She did not explain much. She just listened. Then she noticed the famous pianist standing a short distance away, speaking with an organizer. Her heart began to race again. She told herself not to stare, not to hope. The pianist finished the conversation and walked toward her. Up close, the pianist looked calmer than on stage. Tired even, but the eyes were sharp and kind. The pianist greeted her and asked a few simple questions. Where she learned to play, what music she loved, how often she practiced. Her answers came out quiet but honest. She spoke about learning on her own, about the old keyboard, about practicing whenever she could. She did not try to impress. She just told the truth. The pianist listened without interrupting. After a moment, the pianist nodded slowly and said something she would never forget. That talent like hers needed care, not pressure. That music grows best when supported, not forced. Then came an invitation. It was not grand or dramatic. It was simple. The pianist asked if she would consider attending a future workshop. Nothing was promised. No guarantees. Just an open door. Her chest tightened. She managed to say yes, her voice barely steady. They exchanged brief thanks and then the pianist moved on. The moment passed as quietly as it came. She stood there for a long time afterward, unsure of what to do next. The hall that once felt intimidating now felt different. Not smaller, but more open. As she stepped outside, the city noise rushed back in. Cars passed. People talked. Life continued as usual. Yet something inside her had changed. She thought about everyone back home. About the smiles, the doubt, the jokes. About the nights she practiced alone. None of that disappeared, but it no longer felt as heavy. She realized this was not an ending. It was a beginning. The road ahead was still uncertain. She would still struggle. She would still question herself. But now she knew something important. Her music had reached someone who truly understood it. And that made all the difference. The days after the event passed slowly, yet everything felt different. She returned home with the same small bag, walked the same streets, and entered the same quiet house. Nothing around her had changed, but inside, her thoughts would not settle. The sound of that piano stayed with her, clear and alive, echoing in her mind when the room was silent. At first, she told no one what had happened. Not because she wanted to hide it, but because she was afraid it might sound unreal even to herself. The praise, the invitation, the way people had listened. It felt fragile, like a dream that could break if spoken out loud. She sat at her old keyboard again. The broken keys greeted her like old friends. The sound cut out once, then returned. She smiled softly and began to play. Her fingers moved with a new kind of confidence. Not faster, not louder, just steadier. She was no longer playing to escape. She was playing to grow. Some people noticed the change. A neighbor paused near the window one evening, listening longer than usual. A family member asked why her music sounded different. She did not know how to explain it. It was the same hands, the same room, but the fear was gone. A message arrived a few days later. Simple and respectful. It confirmed the workshop details the pianist had mentioned. Dates, location, and expectations. Reading it made her heart race again. This was real. This was happening. Preparing for it was not easy. Doubt tried to return, whispering that she had already reached her limit, that the people there would be far better than her, that she would be exposed as someone who did not belong. She almost believed it, but each time those thoughts appeared, she remembered the way the pianist had listened. Not judged, not rushed, truly listened. That memory became her anchor. She practiced with intention now, not just repeating pieces but understanding them. She listened closely to her own sound, adjusting small details. She learned to rest when her hands were tired, something she had never allowed herself before. The journey back to the city felt different this time. less overwhelming. She knew where to go. She knew what waited inside the hall. Still, nerves followed her like a shadow. The workshop brought together musicians from many places. Some were confident, speaking easily about teachers and competitions. Others were quiet, focused. She listened more than she spoke, absorbing everything. When it was her turn to play again, her heart raced, but it did not control her. She remembered the silence after her last performance. She remembered why she played. She sat at the piano and began. The sound was not perfect. A few notes slipped, but the feeling was there. Stronger now, deeper. She allowed the music to rise and fall naturally. When she finished, the room stayed quiet for a moment. The pianist nodded slowly. The feedback came gently but honestly. There were things to improve, habits to unlearn, paths to explore. None of it felt crushing. Felt like guidance. Others offered comments too. Some kind, some direct. She accepted them all. This was part of the journey she had always wanted. During breaks, she sat alone at times watching others practice. She did not compare herself the way she once had. Everyone was walking a different road. One afternoon, the pianist spoke to the group about responsibility. About how music can open doors, but only effort keeps them open. About staying grounded when attention arrives. Those words stayed with her. By the end of the workshop, she felt exhausted but full. She had not become someone else. She had become more herself. Before leaving, the pianist spoke with her once more. Not about fame or success, but about patience. About building something slowly, honestly. There was no promise of instant change. Just encouragement to keep going. On the way home, she looked out the window as the city faded behind her. She thought about the future. It was still uncertain, still difficult, but it no longer felt impossible. She returned to her room, sat at the keyboard, and played again. The sound was imperfect. The space was small, yet her music filled it completely. This time she smiled, because she knew she was no longer playing just to be heard. She was playing because she finally believed she belonged. Life did not change overnight after she returned home. There were no sudden crowds, no reporters, no dramatic moments waiting at her door. The mornings still came early, and the evenings still grew quiet in the same way they always had. But something inside her had shifted, steady and real, like a deep breath that never fully left her chest. She went back to her routine, though it no longer felt small. She practiced each day with care, not chasing perfection, but listening closely to herself. When mistakes came, she did not punish herself for them. She paused, understood, and tried again. Music stopped being a test and became a conversation. People around her slowly noticed the difference. Not because she talked about the workshop or the pianist, but because her presence had changed. She carried herself with quiet confidence. When asked about her plans, she spoke honestly. She said she wanted to keep learning. That was all. Some were surprised. Some were proud. A few still doubted. She accepted all of it without letting it weigh her down. She had learned that belief does not always come from others first. Sometimes it has to begin alone. An opportunity came to play at a small local event. Nothing grand. Just a room, a piano, and people who loved music. In the past, she might have declined, afraid of judgment. This time, she said yes. On the day of the event, she arrived early. She sat at the piano and tested the keys. They were worn, uneven, but familiar. When people began to fill the seats, she felt calm. She had played for silence before. She had played for doubt. This time, she played for connection. The music flowed easily. She watched faces soften, shoulders relax. A few people closed their eyes. She did not rush the ending. When the last note faded, the applause felt warm and genuine. Afterward, a young listener approached her and asked how long it took to learn like that. She smiled and answered truthfully. A long time, and it never really ends. Weeks passed. She continued practicing, listening, growing. Sometimes she remembered the famous pianist's words about patience and responsibility. They stayed with her, guiding her choices. One evening, she received another message. Short and encouraging. The pianist had listened to a recording she sent and offered a few notes of advice. Nothing dramatic, just thoughtful words that showed care. She read the message slowly, then sat at her keyboard and played. She no longer imagined grand halls as a way to escape her life. She imagined them as places she could reach, step by step, without losing herself along the way. Her journey was far from over. There would be rejection, slow progress, and moments of doubt again. She knew that now, but she also knew she could face them. Late one night, she paused while practicing and listened to the silence in the room. Felt peaceful, not empty. She thought about the first time people laughed at her dream. How small she had felt. How unsure. She smiled to herself. Not because she had proven anyone wrong, but because she had proven something to herself. She belonged in the world of music, and no one could take that away.